Somewhere in New York City in 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was stabbed to death outside her apartment building while 38 neighbors watched from their windows and did nothing. That story launched one of the most famous concepts in all of psychology, and almost none of it was true. This video is about the bystander effect, why people freeze when someone needs help, what's actually happening in your brain when it happens, and how to override it when it counts. Most people who've heard of this have been told a simplified version that's half myth. So we're going to pull the whole thing apart, because the real story is a lot more interesting and honestly a lot more useful than the version that ended up in every intro psych textbook. Let's start with the founding myth, because it matters more than you'd think. The New York Times ran a story in 1964 claiming 38 witnesses watched Kitty Genovese get murdered and not a single one called the police. That number, 38, came from a casual remark the NYC police commissioner made over lunch with the Times editor, Abe Rosenthal. It was never verified. It was never investigated. It just got printed. What the actual reporting later found was that only 2 witnesses had a clear view of the attack. Others did call the police, and a neighbor named Sophia Farah ran downstairs and held Genovese in her arms as she died. An entire field of psychology was built on a story that was mostly fabricated over a lunch meeting. But here's the thing. Even though the founding story was wrong, the psychological effect it inspired turns out to be very real. It just works differently than most people think. The standard explanation goes like this. When more people are present during an emergency, each individual feels less personally responsible for acting, so nobody acts. That's called diffusion of responsibility, and it's real. But it's only part of what's happening. The deeper part is what's going on in your brain before you've even made a conscious decision. Functional MRI studies show that when people witness an emergency, the brain regions responsible for preparing to help, specifically the medial prefrontal cortex, become less active when more bystanders are present. You're not sitting there thinking, someone else will handle it. Your brain has already quietly powered down the act now signal before you've consciously registered that anything needs to happen. The freeze isn't a choice, it's a reflex. And that distinction matters enormously, because it means that just knowing about the bystander effect isn't enough to save you from it. Most people who learn about this assume they'd now behave differently, but the response is partly neurological. Passive knowledge doesn't override an automatic brain process. Training does. Mental rehearsal does. Experience does. But reading about it in a textbook or watching a video about it, that alone generally doesn't change what your brain does in the moment. That's important, but if you don't understand the 2 systems competing inside you during an emergency, you're still missing the key part of why some people act and others don't. When you witness something alarming, 2 emotional systems activate at the same time. The first one is linked to personal distress. It's the fight, freeze, flight response, and it pushes you toward avoidance. Your body is trying to protect itself. The second system is linked to sympathy. It activates more slowly, and it's the one that actually drives helping behavior. Everyone has both systems. The bystander effect is what happens when the first one wins before the second one can catch up. And the presence of a crowd amplifies that first system because the crowd signals safety through inaction. Everyone else looks calm, so your distress system concludes there must not be a real emergency, and it shuts down the sympathy response before it even gets started. This is called pluralistic ignorance, and it might be the most underrated part of this whole thing. It's not just that people feel less responsible in a crowd, it's that they look around, see other people not reacting, and conclude it must not be serious. And here's the terrifying part. Every single person in that crowd is doing the exact same calculations simultaneously. Everyone is looking at everyone else's inaction as evidence that nothing is wrong, while their own inaction is feeding that same false signal back into everyone else. The whole crowd is essentially gaslighting itself in real time. And this effect is strongest in ambiguous situations, which is most situations. The classic lab experiments used smoke filling a room or a fake seizure. Low risk, low ambiguity setups. But real life is rarely that clear. Most of the time, you're not sure if something is actually an emergency, and that uncertainty is exactly where the bystander effect does its best work.
But here's where it gets interesting.
The bystander effect doesn't always work the way textbooks describe. An analysis of CCTV footage from 80 real-world conflicts found that bystanders were 19 times more likely to intervene in high-danger situations than in low-danger ones. The lab experiments had it backwards. In genuine physical danger, not fake seizures or smoke-filled rooms, crowds often step in. The classic bystander effect is mainly a phenomenon of ambiguity. When danger is obvious, the crowd dynamic flips, and people move toward the threat instead of away from it. So the effect is real, neurological, and amplified by uncertainty, but it can reverse completely when the situation is unmistakably serious. The most reliable way to overcome the bystander effect is to eliminate the crowd psychologically. Make one specific person responsible. Make eye contact. Point at them. If you don't know their name, identify them by appearance. You, in the red jacket, call 911. The moment someone is directly addressed, diffusion of responsibility disappears because the task is now clearly theirs. The same applies if you're the one needing help. Don't shout into a crowd. Choose one person. Point, make eye contact, and say, "You." That single action short-circuits the entire mechanism. The bystander effect also exists online. Studies show that when requests are sent to multiple people, responses decrease because everyone assumes someone else will reply. Group emails, Slack channels, and messages asking, "Can anyone help?" often fail for exactly this reason. The psychology is identical. The crowd has simply moved online. There's also a tribal element. A 2005 study found people were more likely to help someone wearing the jersey of a team they supported. But when participants were first reminded they all belonged to the larger group of football fans, supporters of rival teams were helped equally. Who we help depends partly on perceived group identity. When someone feels like part of your tribe, the freeze response weakens. Researchers also discovered that visible accountability changes everything. When participants knew a webcam was observing them, the bystander effect didn't just shrink, it reversed. People in groups became more likely to help than people who were alone. Anonymity fuels inaction. Accountability encourages action. So here's the bigger picture. The bystander effect is real, but the story that popularized it was largely fabricated. The mechanism isn't just social, it's neurological, occurring before you're consciously aware of it. It's strongest in ambiguous situations, weaker when danger is obvious, and can be interrupted by assigning responsibility to one person through eye contact and a direct request. The popular lesson was that people become cowardly in groups. The real lesson is that groups often perform a faulty social calculation, suppressing the impulse to help before it reaches consciousness. Fortunately, that process can be broken with a finger point and a simple sentence. Have you ever frozen when you should have acted, or watched a crowd do nothing? Share your experience below. And if you enjoy exploring the science behind human behavior, subscribe for more videos like this.